Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Enlightenment today. Enlightenment is a Wuyi Mountain cliff tea. We're going to focus attention on that today. And by day's end, you'll definitely know the difference between Enlightenment and Rainbow Ice that you tried last week. So let's go ahead and jump right on into the Wuyi Mountains, to the environment that Enlightenment grows under, and we're going to get into more detail that we weren't able to last week. So you remember last week I gave you a description of the Wuyi Mountains, lots of peaks, 36 or so, volcanic. In the great tea growing regions, it's gravelly with soil underneath. As you get away from those great tea growing regions, you have fewer broken up rocks, more soil. As you get out of the Wuyi Mountains, you get clayey soil. And so the result is you have a different product, even though it can be the same plant, same varietal, you get a different product. So let's fill in a little bit more about the environment of the Wuyi Mountains. Now, you saw this morning, for those of you who've been up more than 5 minutes, that I sent two maps. One map is a map of Fujian province alone. So let's start with that colorful map first. It's Fujian province. If you look at the northwest corner, so that would be your top left as you're looking at that map, you'll see Wuyishan, W-U-Y-I, and then S-H-A-N. That's the area that we're talking about. And you see that it borders Jiangxi province, J-I-A-N-G-X-I, Jiangxi province. So in the next map I sent you, it's a map of China entirely, but in red, there's Jiangxi province. So you can see the relationship between Fujian and Jiangxi. Now, I know none of you joined this morning for a geography lesson, but I did need to point these two out because how over time did people migrate to the Wuyi Mountains? Well, one of the main ways was they came over the pass right there at the Wuyi Mountains from Jiangxi. And so you have not only Buddhists, Taoists, and Confucianists in the Wuyi Mountains, you have peasants who weren't able to make a livelihood in Jiangxi, bringing different elements into the Wuyi Mountains. So this is a melange of all sorts of culture, but it's local culture. You didn't have people from Northeast China finding their way to the Wuyi Mountains. No, you had people, because Jiangxi at some points was very poor. And so the result was, during certain eras, was very poor. And there was war and famine and all the pestilences of the imperial eras during certain years. And so those people gravitated into the Wuyi Mountains, which was more stable. There were fewer types of incursions into the Wuyi Mountains. So you had all of that activity going on. And that obviously influences the cultural terroir. Because these peasants came and they did tea there. And in Jiangxi, by the way, they were also doing tea. So it wasn't that they came from Jiangxi doing some other crop and then all of a sudden started up in tea. Jiangxi also produces tea, although it's not of the same level as the Wuyi Mountains, and it's certainly not cliff tea. All right, so that gives you a little bit additional information about cultural terroir. Let's look at the physical terroir just a little bit more. So think of a horseshoe. A horseshoe is a U, right? And if you think of the columns of that horseshoe as pointing towards the south, and the curvature on which the columns rest as abutting Jiangxi province. Now you begin to understand how this becomes such an ideal place. What does that mean? What that means is that the mountains at that pass, by the way, it's over 7,000 feet. So what happens is the cold air that comes swinging down from central China gets stopped essentially right there at the curvature of the horseshoe, at that 7,000 elevation point, right there at the border. And then as the mountain gets lower, the mountain doesn't get lower, as the elevation of the mountain decreases, as you go down the mountain, in other words, the weather becomes more and more subdivided into microclimates. Generally speaking, it's humid. Generally speaking, it's very, very temperate. In other words, there's not a wide range of temperature. It does occasionally snow up at the 7,000 foot level, but as soon as you get out of that area, it very rarely snows in other parts of Wuyi Mountain. And even when it snows in the 7,000 foot area, the snow doesn't stay there for a long time. So you don't have much coldness. You have lots of peaks where the U opens up, right? 36 different peaks. You have in those valleys that are created around those peaks, different microclimates. And so there's different growing conditions, and that's why it influences the final product. Because if you're growing in a small microclimate and say the average temperature is maybe 68, 67, and you're not getting much sunlight as compared to another microclimate where the peaks are further apart, you get more hours of sun. The result in the varietal, it's the same varietal, you're going to get a different flavor. So thus, when people say to me, hey, they come in the shop, and let's say that they even know Fujian province. Maybe they grew up around Fujian province, but they're not really tea experts. They come and they say, oh, I want Scarlet Road. Okay, that's fine. And what precise flavor profile? Oh, no, you didn't hear me. I said, I want Scarlet Road. Or they say, they come in and they say, I want Rogue Way, cinnamon. And it's like, yeah, I can give you that. But you do understand, don't you, that from every area, it's going to taste different. So when you're looking for taste and you're looking across a broad category, let's define that. Say you're looking at a varietal and you're thinking, yep, when I had this varietal in China, it made me think of whatever, plums or floral, whatever it made you think of. And you come and you order somewhere else and it doesn't make you think of it. And you think, oh my God, these guys did a bait and switch on me. No, that's not what happened. It can happen sometimes, but never here. That's never what happens here. We understand the flavor profile. So that's why we always ask people about flavor profiles rather than varietal, because flavor profile is not tied to varietal, not in the way that you expect it to be tied, or that tea drinkers sometimes expect things to be tied to varietal. So this is very important, and it's very important for we cliff tea drinkers, because in some places they go to a shop, they'll get what's called a special varietal. Let me give you an example. They'll get a varietal called 105. Now, you'll laugh because very rarely do you see a tea shop advertise a varietal as a number. But actually, I've seen in New York City that there's one that actually advertises a certain varietal from the Wuyi Mountains as 105. I happen to know what that is because I understand the naming conventions from Wuyi Mountains, and this is something that was hybridized, or the start of the hybridization process took place in the 1980s, and it really got to market in the early 2000s. So there's advertisements. So the question then becomes, oh, by the way, do I have this stuff? Yeah, I do. Do I have it in more than one flavor profile? Yes, I do. Wow, how did that happen? Because I got it, Tea Master and I got it from different farms, different locations within the mountains. And we got it specifically because the flavor profile is different. So this leads to other problems of interpretation. And they're not problems, they're facts of what goes on with cliff teas. Why is it you read in some internet profiles or a ChatGPT summary, why is it you read, well, the Wuyi Mountains has 5 main varietals or 6 main varietals, and then there's a bunch of these other small varietals, and nobody ever is able to really give you a number. Nothing you can take to the bank. So that's one issue. And then the second issue is some publications will say the following. Yes, there are a lot of different varietals, and they all fall under the class of vegetal varietals. Oh, was that helpful to all of you? Vegetal varietals. I'll tell you, the very first time that I encountered that term, and it's a specific Chinese term, Cai Ta, very specific. I know the 2 characters. I see those 2 characters all the time. Is that a varietal? It's called a varietal, but no, that's bad translation. It's a whole category of sub-varietals. That's what that is. And that's why we have so many here, because we're looking under this broad category. Now, why in the world, you're wondering to yourselves, did scientists in China allow things to become so, in quotes, confused? Why didn't they just use a naming convention to make it easier? Well, actually, they did, kind of. So the kind of part is they adopted numbers for every single varietal. This is all over China. The sad part is that document is not very easily accessible. And even if it were, the numbers are 5 or 6 digits. Do you think you'd go around in your head? Let's see, I want 11483, or is it 348? I want one of those 111s. Not practical for any customer in China or in the West. That's a bad way for us to really refer to the names. It's not a bad way, it's a very scientific way, but it's not helpful to us for memory purposes and for understanding what they've done with the generalized term. Well, it's clear what they've done with the generalized term. They've tried to make it very scientific, but for a consumer, it's very useless. So that's why we attach names to each varietal And even within multiple of the same varietals from different areas with different taste profiles, you got to attach names. Otherwise, people aren't going to get what they expect. Yes.
Miscellaneous comment from a participant. Unless somebody wanted to do a tour of tea by choosing the prime number tea in sequence or odd or even, etc.
Yes, some mathematician just brought it up. Yeah, it would be a great system for those who want to drink tea by prime number or by even number or by odd number. Yeah, so that's the point. The point is that's where the confusion really lies. And so your next question should be, do all tea purveyors understand these distinctions? Sadly, the answer is no. Why aren't they understanding these distinctions? Well, first off, you see they're complicated. And so if you don't speak both English and Chinese, you're in trouble right away because you see things translate. Oh yeah, this belongs to the miscellaneous vegetal varieties. The miscellaneous vegetal varieties. That's a literal translation, but it's a bad translation, isn't it? It's bad for our purposes. It's bad for a tea drinker's purposes, but it's literally what's written in some Chinese explanations, in some Chinese texts. And so if you're studying from afar and you're not on the ground, you're going to have a certain impression. If you're on the ground and actually seeing what's referred to, so case in point, do all of these, in quotes, vegetal varietals look the same? No, not even close. Some of them different leaf shape, some more elongated, some rounder, some bushes smaller, some larger. They're truly different varietals. How come again they got all grouped? Can you give me historical background on why they got grouped like this? And I certainly can. It's because throughout history, this term has been used for a long time in this area. Actually, it's been used in a couple other areas as well. And it's really confusing because from era to era, it was hard to really narrow in on something that everybody agreed, yeah, this is what I'm referring to, era by era. So that's really the issue over time in terms of these varietals. The other part of that issue is, were there a lot of them? Well, yeah, there were a lot of small batch, but there weren't fields and fields of one vegetal varietal, and then another fields and fields of another. No, these things are all intergrowing in the mountains, on top of the mountains, on the sides of the mountains. This is a peculiar environment. It's not what you see when you go to Assam in India and you stand out there, you look for the borders of where the tea fields are. You can't see them. It's a true plantation. This is completely different. You're in the mountains, you're walking between these peaks. You look up, hey, that's tea growing on the side. Some of it can't even be harvested because it's so remote and it planted itself there, so to speak. And so thus, that's why all over the place you get these small varietals. Farmers are really smart because over time, the farmers understood, hey, this thing's different. Let's see, I can call this anything I want. So there's some very fanciful historical names for small varietals, which we have a hard time actually isolating and saying, well, today it would be this. Because at one point, when they did counting, it seemed like there was between 800 and 1,000 different varietals in the Wuyi Mountains. What was the question?
So vegetal as a category then refers to the flavor, that's what you said, so these could be different varieties in terms of actual biological structure, but they're all yielding a vegetal quality in the flavor?
Love this question. And this would seem to make true. So be true, but it's not. The question is, we use this term, or this term is translated as vegetal varietals. And does that suggest, did they use that term because all the different varietals have a vegetality to them? And the answer is no. This was a catch-all term that somebody made up a long time ago. And maybe, and this is really an interesting question from another standpoint, because maybe a long time ago it had a different, more specific meaning than it does today. And Chinese, because it's such a long culture, not long culture, but long historical culture, and the language has morphed many, many times over the years. Remembering that most of the ancient texts, so that's, we're going to go beyond tea, and then I'll get back on tea right away. In the Tang Dynasty, let's go even earlier than the Tang Dynasty, a very long time ago, pre-Han Dynasty, they used to write these glyphs, hieroglyphs, or these characters on bones. Now, are those characters looking the same as they look today? Occasionally, but in most cases, no. And even as they started to write on paper, did they look the same then? No. Was there uniformity? So what's the Western analog? Let's go back pre-Gutenberg press. Before you had the printing press in the West, how did you get a book? Somebody had to copy, right? This was scribes or monks or somebody with education had to copy. What about the monks that had more education versus less education? Well, you got different copies, didn't you? Same in Chinese, even worse in Chinese, because these characters are very specific. If you add an extra stroke or two, those people who come later, like me, and look at this and, well, wait a minute, this doesn't say tea. There's too many strokes here. This can't be tea. And then you have to use comparative analysis in order to eventually figure out what is meant by tea, or what is meant by a specific character that doesn't look like today's character for tea. So lots of complications in thinking about this problem. So, but this answered again directly the question. The use of the term vegetal varietals, does that refer to flavor? And no, it does not refer to flavor. It just is a catch-all for miscellaneous, very small batch varietals. That today is the best way to understand this and the best way to translate. So were there ever really 800 to 1,000 varietals in the Wuyi Mountains? We don't know. We do know that there were a lot of these small varietals, but we don't have a precise number. If you ask me today, my feeling today versus 10 years ago is it's a much fewer number than what I originally thought. I actually, in the beginning, as I was looking at research and looking at possibilities, I thought, yeah, maybe 800 different varietals. Today, I really think maybe it was about half of that, perhaps. Still, nonetheless, when you think about that, that's still a huge number of varietals in a small area. The varietals in terms of number of bushes could be as small as one bush. one different variety. So that's why this has become complicated over the years. This is why historically, this is a very thorny subject to pull apart and try and understand what the situation is. But it's not thorny at all in today's market situation to understand why you should be naming the same varietal, but from a different location or a different part of the mountain with a different name. You can always refer back to that varietal, but when you're trying to narrow down a flavor or a taste profile and you have something in mind, the beauty of this shop is you can come in and tell us, here's what I have in mind. I don't know what the heck it's really supposed to be called, and we'll get you to that place. Most places don't have scope enough to really be able to do that for you. And so that's what leads to disappointment among tea drinkers who go to one place, hey, I got this thing called this at this place, Scarlet Rope called it this place. I got it at this other place, and boy, did it taste different. I get it at your place, it tastes really different. Lots of things going on with that. You have to understand that there's all these elements which go into differentiating one tea from the other. All right, it's time for us to be thirsty. Oh, I knew there's a reason I was feeling so thirsty. It's past time for us to feel thirsty. And you know, this morning, now that I've said all these things, I think I've dumped out everything I know. So what I need is further enlightenment. So it gives me great pleasure to bring up the tea master to do enlightenment, to demonstrate and then do it with you.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Yeah, we do oolong tea. Translated, it's the oolong tea. Yeah, Chinese call oolong. Yeah, translated oolong tea. So this is my, so, but in China, the same thing, this is my setup. Yeah, so very clean, but it's really close by Gongfu Cha. Okay, so.
So she demonstrates to set up a tray, a glass, a clay pot, some tea toys. And remember to refer to your instructions for timings, depending on what type of pot you're using, because the timings are different for a clay pot, as opposed to a ceramic, and wildly different for glass. The amount you would normally use for a special clay pot would be less than one of these clay pots, but all of you or most of you have this type of clay pot, so the clay pot timing is and amount is correct. So you see, Tea Master pours 200-degree water over everything, make sure everything is very, very clean. There's no interfering flavors, no leftover leaves, no soap spots on the glass. Everything is in good shape. She then gets bag number 2 and prepares that. Takes the leaves out. This is the Enlightenment. And she's going to put them in the clay pot carefully. And this particular clay pot that you see in front of you is nearly 16 ounces. She shakes the leaves. She's trying to wake up the leaves. She smells to make sure it's what she expects to be in there, actually is in there. And then she'll draw 200-degree water. And this is filtered water. And we have industrial filters here, and it's useful to get filtered water if it's convenient to do so. You'll get a better flavor. And so she uses this kettle to direct the flow of water into the pot, trying not to pour directly on the leaves. Your timers, when you do this, will be set at 2 minutes and 20 seconds if you're using a clay pot. And you notice she does one thing which is very reminiscent of Kung Fu style tea. She pours water on the outside of the pot. Why would you do that? It's because these pots retain heat, the best of all the pots that we use. And Wulong tea specifically, well, all Wulong teas appreciate higher heat, more concentrated heat. And so when you pour on the outside, that sometimes is able to bring out even a little bit more flavor. And by the way, that's one of the major distinguishing characteristics between the special pots and these special clay pots and these clay pots. The special clay pots, because of where they're mined in the vein, that layer, which is the bottom layer, retains heat even better than your regular Yixing pots. All right. So I set the timer, I believe. Oh, I did set the timer. And we were talking about the naming conventions, and we're talking about why it's hard sometimes to really go from shop to shop, especially if they don't have a wide scope. Yes.
I'm thinking you shared before that there's some teas for which, however, there is an emblematic core flavor that is expected, like scarlet rose, since you brought that up as an example, that there may be, and maybe I'm misremembering, at least a handful of teas that are so iconic. How does that, is that true, first of all?
So this is a subtle, nuanced question, and it's a great question. Are any of the cliff teas such that there is always going to be some hint of expected flavor wherever you go? Time will tell. I will answer that in a minute. Timer's gone off. Tea master separates tea leaves from the tea liquor via the pot. There's a sieve inside the pot. It's by a few, if any, leaves get in. Beautiful, beautiful, steady, rhythmic pour. So let's take a look at this color. Yours, when you do it, should look something like this. So it's darkish, but not so heavily dark that it's huge roast. You can tell right away, this is medium to heavy roast, which means it's been roasted 2 or 3 times, but it hasn't been roasted 4 times. You will enter the quality arena. First, take a smell, and you don't even need to get your nose close to this. You can smell this thing right away. Take a look at your leaves. And so when we enter the quality arena for the first sip, it's really an inhalation, isn't it? It's 200 degrees, dangerously hot. You have to be careful. And really, you want the hint of liquid on your tongue. And what you're trying to determine is where in your mouth is there astringency. So that's one of the first things you're trying to determine. Next, you'll be trying to determine, do I get a little aftertaste of this, after I swallow? And what is that aftertaste? And then lastly, what about how it makes me feel? How do I feel? Many times as Americans, and it's not just Americans, by the way, we consume stuff so fast, whether it's food or beverage, that sometimes we lose track of how it's affecting us. Well, you can't do that with a 200-degree liquid. You got to do it slowly. And you should always do it slowly for tea so that you get what that feel is, what the energetics are. So let's go ahead and enter. You're not entering yet, you will be. So not in a hurry, just trying to get that mouthfeel settled in my head. And then I'm going to do it again because I want to start to work on aroma. I want to start to work on perceived taste. And remember, unlike almost any of the other styles of tea, this will appear to change. I used the word appear. Is it really changing? Well, there is some change, but less than what we imagine. What it is it cools down and more of your taste buds can become involved in actually giving you a more complete picture. So throughout the entire cup, actually, it will appear as if it's changing. You're changing more than it's changing. Both are occurring at the same time. All right, it's your turn to brew. I haven't forgotten that nuanced question. I will get to it in a few minutes. Prepare your tableau, set your timer for 2 minutes and 20 seconds. What's up? Tea Master is getting everything ready. And again, you may have seen her pour the leaves out from the first steeping. Now, you wouldn't do that at home. You'd actually make a second cup. But here, since we're showing you the principles of this, we do that. We make sure that the pot is completely free of any leftover leaves. Otherwise, it will influence the flavor outcome. All right, so you open bag number 2, labeled Enlightenment. And you get the leaves ready to pour into the pot, whatever type you're using. You make sure you set the timer in accordance with what type of pot you're using. Take the pot, give it a smell. And then what the tea master does is she draws 200-degree water into a kettle that she can direct the flow from. And if you put 200-degree water directly in the pot, you can do that. That's okay. You get an absolutely better result if you can direct it, but it's not such a great difference that it makes that much difference that you're gonna taste it. Obviously, it's the details matter, but it's the combination of the details that really matter. You set your time. All right, and we have this nuanced question in front of us. Does type or varietal have some element in it that anywhere you go and buy that varietal, you'll say, yeah, this belongs to that varietal? So the answer really is no. The closest is scarlet rope. And it's interesting, you brought scarlet rope specifically up. And the reason it's close is because the farm, remember, most scarlet rope is all scarlet rope that we would drink as a blend. And it's a blend of many varietals. And they're all related to the original scarlet rope, but there is very, very little original scarlet rope left. So everything is an offshoot, a clone, or some sort of hybridization from those original trees. And the reason it tends to have a little bit more similarity is because at certain levels, the farmers are trying to achieve a standardized, in quotes, flavor. And because you blend it, you can year by year get something closer to a standard than you can for a single varietal, which year by year is influenced by terroir considerations, in addition to differences during the production process. So let me say it again in a different way. In the production process, if it is small batch production, is the process the same every year? So technically, yeah, the steps are the same, but remembering that the steps execution varies by weather conditions, doesn't it? And therefore, you're going to end up with a different result. The timer's gone off. You're separating the tea leaves from the tea liquor.
We have a question from a participant. So I know you've mentioned before many times that the amount of tea that you send out is appropriate to be used for 12-ounce glasses as well as for 16-ounce glasses. So I think her question is more about maybe what's the right temperature. She's using glass, which I think then it's more about brewing time, right? It's still 200 degrees, but does the brew time get longer when there's glass used?
Significantly longer. The brewing time for glass is, if it's a 12-ouncer, usually 4 minutes. If you did it 4 minutes and 15 seconds, that wouldn't hurt it. It's between 4 minutes and 4:15. Remembering that glass changes the nature of what you're going to taste, mainly because it dissipates heat so fast, relative to how fast a ceramic, and really relative to how fast a clay pot dissipates heat. So that's the main reason that there's a difference, and that's why we always recommend don't use glass. If that's all you have, then that's what you got to use. But you'll find as your practice, as you gain more experience and as you have a longer practice with the cliff teas, as you get to the clay pot, it's a very significant difference in flavor, even if you follow our instructions precisely. And then if you edge over into the very special clay pots, it's again a huge surprise because there's yet more of a difference in flavor. Yeah.
One of the participants says the dry leaves smell very sweet and the brewed tea smells a bit like cinnamon to her. The tea tastes very juicy with a bit of dryness on the tip of the tongue.
Tea leaves, dry, sweet. The tea liquor is almost a hint of spiciness / cinnamoniness. It is what other?
She says tastes maybe, but the experience is that it's also juicy with a
Juicy.
bit of dryness on the tip of the tongue.
Great. Juicy with a bit of dryness on the tip of the tongue. I like the entire description. There's no part of this description that I don't like. The leaves give you one sort of sensation. And so you're headed down the sweet freeway. But when you actually taste the tea, the juicy off-ramp is right there. And that's where you're detoured onto, because that sweetness kind of morphs into a balance and a juiciness. Love this comment. Yes.
Another participant says the dry unheated leaves had a scent of caramel and dried cherries.
Scent of caramel and dried cherries in the dry unheated leaves. And I love this also because they don't call this cliff/rock tea for no reason. When they are making that appellation, they're really referring to all of these aromas that you just don't expect from a tea. So rock and floral, rock and caramel, rock and fruit are always associated with these teas. And they have a saying in the Wuyi Mountains. It goes something like this: for rock/cliff tea, and they're really referring to the rock/bones. You get 2 parts, one of those flavors I just mentioned, and 1 part roast. Something like that. It goes something like that. They're really good cliff teas.
So she's got more
Oh, good.
to share in her experience. So after she heated the leaves, the caramel scent became more pronounced and buttery. Still got some fruit. And then the wet leaves smelled woodsy and vegetal and sweet.
Love, again, this very complete description. So we went from the dry leaves, cherry, sweet, to wet leaves, which still have some sweetness in them, still have some fruit in them, but additionally, more of a caramelly type of aroma. Did I miss anything?
No, you did
Okay.
not miss anything. It was, I've broken the comment. There's a follow-up comment
Okay.
from
Okay.
our participant saying that the minerality then came through the tea liquor with a flavor of deeply cooked caramel, chocolate covered cherries, lightly astringent on her palate and tip of the tongue.
Lightly astringent on the palate. There's a flavor that comes through still of cherries, of chocolatiness, of caramelness. And the minerality starts to make itself felt. And I like this comment again because of the balanced nature of it. So what do I mean by balanced nature? Didn't forget any of the elements. There is minerality. Is it dominant? No. We have teas in here that if you wanted a dominant minerality, they would put this to shame. Not dominant, but there. Is it sweet? Not hugely sweet, but it's more like that carameliness, butteriness, rather than the impression of strong sweetness. It's like the caramel makes you believe it should be sweet. I'm tasting burnt sugar. And yet it's not all that sweet. It's more, I like the fruity portion of that, the cherry portion of that. Little hints of chocolate also, all appropriate for this one.
Participant says, hey, who's on the road says, from everyone's description of tea, I think it's worth it to wait to brew when I get hold of my clay pot. Absolutely get that. Somebody else comments, this is her fave hot rock tea.
Oh, I love this. This participant play on words, her favorite hot rock tea. Just love this. This is unmistakable, even in the midst of that fun. It's unmistakable. And again, I like this comment because you can't mistake this for another style of tea. You simply can't, because it's got the rock bones in there.
Another participant says the flavor feels much more delicate than some of the other cliff teas, and the roast is balanced with some sweetness and spiciness.
Roast is balanced with sweetness and spiciness, and much more. This participant makes a note, and I love this note because, and I'm going to add to it, very balanced. And in addition to that, and I'm sure this participant meant this as they fleshed out the comment, it's a roundedness. It's balanced and there's a roundedness. You get all of those flavors in that balance, but none of them is backing you off as if, hey, I'm the boss. Oh, no, no boss is here. This is all together. All right. So think about this in relationship to rainbow ice. Is this different or the same? We'll go back and look at your notes of rainbow ice.
Another participant, no comment yet on that, but says they say they love the smoothness and the juiciness, and it's complemented by this gentle building astringency.
Smoothness, juiciness, complemented with a building or budding astringency. Love this comment because that's all about the roundedness. Everything, it's like a dance, and the dancers are following their steps perfectly. Nothing is out of place. This is what this tea reminds me of, and you're echoing that in your comments. Really good commentary. All right, while you're thinking about the question of rainbow ice and as a comparison to this, I'll answer a little bit in interest of time. So from my perspective, both were balanced. However, rainbow ice stood out in one way that's very different from this. The rainbow ice actually had more of an obvious sweetness than this does. This, it's the hint of sweetness, but it's not really sweetness. It's caramelly, fruit without being really fruity. Rainbow ice had more of, hey, this really has not only balance, but the sweetness is what ties it together. Yes.
Participant says she doesn't have access to her notes on rainbow ice, but does remember that she finds this current tea Enlightenment more stimulating than rainbow ice, and the flavor is very different, and she'd have a hard time choosing one over the other.
Flavor is very different, this participant notes, and I love what she picked up on, or the participant picked up on, is that this one is very stimulating. It is from an energetics perspective versus rainbow ice. For me, it is more stimulating. And so great catch on that.
The participant said rainbow ice seemed to land more on the middle of her tongue.
Okay, so for this other participant, rainbow ice was in the middle of the tongue. Whereas for several people already, they've noted that this is on the edge of the tongue. And remembering that all of us are different, so genomically different. So if it's landing in a place differently than what you're hearing, don't be alarmed. You're still okay.
Any food pairing that you would recommend, and what's the vintage of tea?
So this one, well, let's talk about the food pairing first while I think about the vintage of the tea. Yeah, this one, actually, I can answer the vintage of the tea. Just took me one more second to do it. 2016. And from a food pairing perspective, this one you could actually, and this will be a little counterintuitive. If you're having a brunch you can actually start with this
Hmm.
and then go into your brunch. And so there's a reason I say this, because if you start with this and say you serve once they're down to half a cup, that a feeling in the belly is one of increased hunger, one of, oh gosh, I want some food now, that type of feeling. And that's why I think that this would be a good way to match this up. And it's not going to interfere with any of the flavors. If you're going to do an egg and avocado, scramble, or some other of that nature, maybe have some toast with it, this will work really, really well, because nothing in this will disturb whatever your intent was with the brunch itself. All right, so we've come to the end for enlightenment. Well, we haven't come to the end for enlightenment. We still have plenty of enlightenment to go. But for this particular tea called enlightenment, yes, we're at the end of this session. Next week, we're still in Fujian province, but we're taking a very different journey. We're going south. We're going to Anxi, Changzhou area, and we're going to get a southern Wulong tea. Southern Wulong tea is so much simpler to process. It takes usually about a day, day and a half to process. It's on the market within 30 days of completion, versus this, which really takes 3 to 4 months, starts in April, mid-April, usually the pick, ends usually mid to the end of May. So a lot of differences. You'll immediately be able to tell differences in flavor profiles as well as aroma profiles. So look forward to next week. These oolong teas are always fun because they have such a wide range to them. Your responsibilities this week are to stay safe. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.
Take care. Bye.